Jake Morrison floated through the corridors of Galactic Academy, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor with each step. 3 months had passed since he first arrived at the massive space station, and he still felt like an outsider among the hundreds of alien students. The other species would stop talking when he walked by, their strange eyes following his every movement. The human teenager had grown used to the stares by now. He was the first of his kind to attend the academy, the first student from what the aliens called a Deathworld. Earth was considered too dangerous, too harsh for most galactic species to survive on. But Jake had proven that humans could adapt to their peaceful space environment just as easily as they adapted to Earth's deadly storms and wild animals. This morning felt different, though. As Jake made his way to the training center, he noticed more whispers than usual. Groups of Centaurian students with their blue skin and large eyes would cluster together, speaking in hushed tones. The insect-like Crixtal species clicked their mandibles nervously when he passed. Even the peaceful, plant-based Verdani seemed to shift their branches away from him. Jake tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. He had work to do. Today was gravity simulation training, one of his favorite classes. While most alien species struggled with changing gravitational fields, Jake found it easy. Growing up on Earth meant dealing with different terrains, weather, and physical challenges every day. His body knew how to adapt quickly. The training center was a massive dome filled with platforms, obstacles, and machinery designed to test student reflexes and adaptation skills. Professor HFY, a tall Centaurian with kind eyes, greeted the class as they assembled on the main platform. Today we practice emergency responses in shifting gravity, the professor announced, his translator device converting his musical language into standard galactic speech. The simulation will create conditions similar to a damaged spacecraft. You must reach the emergency stations while gravity changes around you. Jake nodded along with the other students. This exercise was meant to prepare them for real space emergencies. In his first month, Jake had watched other students panic when gravity suddenly increased or decreased. But he had learned to roll with the changes, using momentum and balance techniques that reminded him of surfing back on Earth. The simulation began normally. Gravity slowly decreased from standard levels, making everyone feel lighter. The Centaurian. Students moved gracefully, their bodies naturally suited for low-gravity environments. The Crixtal used their multiple limbs to maintain stability. Jake bent his knees and kept his center of gravity low, techniques his father had taught him for hiking on uneven mountain trails. Then something went wrong. The gravity field suddenly spiked to 3 times normal strength. Jake felt his body slam toward the floor, but his muscles were ready. Years of carrying heavy backpacks up steep hills had prepared him for this kind of pressure. He pressed his hands against the metal surface and pushed himself into a controlled crawl toward the nearest wall. Around him, other students were not so lucky. The Centaurians, used to light gravity, were pinned helplessly to the floor. Their delicate bones weren't built for such pressure. Several Crixtal students made chittering sounds of distress as their thin limbs bent at uncomfortable angles. The Verdani couldn't move at all, their root-like feet trapped against the deck. Emergency protocols are not responding, Professor, HFY called out. His voice strained as he tried to reach the control panel. The gravity field is locked at maximum intensity. Jake looked around the training center. The emergency shutoff switches were mounted on the walls about 20 feet from where most students had fallen. In normal gravity, it would be an easy walk. In triple gravity, it might as well have been a mountain climb for most species. But not for a human from Earth. Jake had climbed real mountains. He had hiked through storms with wind trying to knock him over. He had carried injured friends down steep trails when rescue was hours away. This was just another challenge, another problem to solve. He began moving along the wall, using his hands and feet to distribute his weight. His breathing stayed steady, a technique learned from his high school wrestling coach. Don't fight the pressure. Work with it. Find the rhythm. Stay calm. Jake, be careful, called Lisa Carter from across the room. The ambassador's daughter was one of the few other humans at the academy. Though she was there for diplomatic training rather than general studies, she was pressed against the floor like everyone else, unable to move in the crushing gravity. Jake reached the first emergency panel, but his fingers were too thick for the delicate alien controls. These switches were designed for Centaurian hands, not human ones. He looked around and spotted a stylus used for taking notes. Stretching carefully, he managed to grab it and use it to flip the switch. Nothing happened. The gravity stayed at crushing levels. 3 Centaurian students near the center of the room were making sounds of pain. Their bodies weren't designed for this kind of stress. Jake realized they might be seriously hurt if the gravity didn't return to normal soon. He spotted another emergency panel on the far side of the room. This one was near a collapsed training module that had fallen when the gravity increased. Getting there would mean crawling under twisted metal and debris, but it might be their only chance. Jake started moving again, his muscles burning from the effort. Each movement was like doing push-ups with extra weight, but he had done harder workouts back home. Cross-country running in Colorado mountains was good training for almost anything. As he crawled under the collapsed module, Jake heard something that made his blood run cold. The metal above him was creaking, settling under the extra gravitational pressure. If it fell completely, it would crush him and block access to the emergency controls. But there were 3 Centaurian students who needed help. There were friends counting on him. Jake had never left anyone behind on Earth, and he wasn't about to start now. He pushed forward, reaching the second control panel just as the metal groaned loudly above him. His fingers worked the controls, and suddenly the gravity returned to normal levels. Students around the room gasped with relief as they could finally move again. Jake rolled out from under the collapsed module just as it settled completely to the floor. A few seconds later, and he would have been trapped. Professor HFY rushed over to check on the injured students while Jake sat against the wall, catching his breath. The crisis was over, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something about this accident didn't feel right. The safety protocols had never failed before. The gravity controls had multiple backup systems, and the timing seemed too convenient, happening just when all the students were most vulnerable. As medical teams arrived to help the injured Centaurians, Jake noticed something else. Several students were watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Some looked impressed. Others seemed almost afraid. A few appeared angry, as if his success in the emergency had somehow made them upset. Lisa Carter approached him as the training center cleared out. "That was amazing, Jake. I don't think anyone else could have reached those controls." "It's what anyone would do," Jake replied. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Most of the alien species couldn't have moved in that gravity, let alone carried out a rescue. His human physiology, shaped by Earth's demanding environment, had given him abilities that seemed almost superhuman to species from gentler worlds. But instead of making him feel proud, the realization made him uneasy. If his natural abilities seemed so unusual to his classmates, what did that mean for his place at the academy? And why did today's accident feel so much like a test? As Jake walked back to his quarters, he couldn't help but notice the way other students looked at him now. The whispers had changed from curiosity to something else. Some students seemed grateful, others appeared nervous, and a few looked at him with what could only be described as suspicion. Jake Morrison, the pupil from a Deathworld, was beginning to understand that his biggest challenges at Galactic Academy might not come from the coursework or the alien environment. They might come from proving that being different didn't make him dangerous. Jake Morrison woke up early the next morning, unable to sleep after finding the small electronic device hidden behind his study desk. The tiny black box was no bigger than his thumb, but it had been watching him, recording him. Someone at Galactic Academy was spying on the human student, and Jake had a pretty good idea why. He slipped the device into his pocket and made his way to the dining hall. The massive space was filled with students from dozens of different species, all eating their various foods and chattering in multiple languages. Jake spotted Lisa Carter sitting alone at a corner table, picking at her protein paste with obvious distaste. "Morning, Lisa," Jake said, sliding into the seat across from her. "We need to talk." Lisa looked up, her brown eyes immediately alert. As the daughter of Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, she had learned to read people quickly. You look like someone who didn't sleep much. What's wrong? Jake glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then pulled out the surveillance device. I found this in my room last night. Someone's been watching me. Lisa's eyes widened as she examined the small box. This is Centaurian technology. Very advanced. The kind of thing intelligence services use. She lowered her voice. Jake, this is serious. If someone's spying on you, it might be connected to yesterday's accident. That's what I'm thinking, Jake said. The gravity malfunction, the way some students looked at me afterward, and now this. Someone's building a case against me. Against you, or against all humans? Lisa asked. Remember, you're not just representing yourself here. You're the first human student. If you fail or get kicked out, it could affect Earth's relationship with the entire Galactic Council. Jake felt the weight of that responsibility settling on his shoulders. Back on Earth, he had been just another high school student who happened to test well enough for the exchange program. Here, he was humanity's representative to the galaxy. Every mistake he made reflected on his entire species. We need to find out who's behind this, Jake said. But we can't do it alone. We need help from someone who understands how the Academy works. Lisa nodded toward the faculty table where Professor HFY was eating his morning meal. What about him? He seemed genuinely concerned about you yesterday. I was thinking the same thing, Jake said. But first I want to do some research. If there's a conspiracy against human students, there might be records or communications we can find. After breakfast, Jake and Lisa made their way to the Academy's Information Center. The vast digital library contained millions of documents, research papers, and historical records from across the galaxy. Jake had spent many hours here learning about alien cultures and histories, but today, he was looking for something specific. Let's start with recent communications about the human exchange program, Lisa suggested, accessing one of the research terminals. Her diplomatic background had taught her how to navigate bureaucratic systems. They spent the next 2 hours searching through files, cross-referencing names and dates. Most of the documents were routine administrative records, but gradually a pattern began to emerge. Several high-ranking officials had expressed concerns about allowing humans into galactic society. The language was careful and diplomatic, but the message was clear. Look at this, Lisa said, pointing to a communication from 3 weeks ago. Ambassador Velthara from the Hegemony wrote to the Academy administration. She's questioning whether species from high-stress environments can integrate peacefully with galactic civilization. Jake read over her shoulder. The message was polite, but pointed, suggesting that humans might be too aggressive or unpredictable for academic settings. It recommended additional monitoring and evaluation of human students. Additional monitoring, Jake repeated. Like surveillance devices? Exactly. Lisa scrolled through more files. And look who else has been asking questions about you specifically. Chancellor Morden himself requested copies of all your test scores, medical records, and behavioral evaluations. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The Chancellor was the head of the entire Academy. If he was involved in watching Jake, this conspiracy went much higher than they had imagined. There's more, Lisa said, her voice tight with concern. I found a research proposal from Dr. Amy Foster. She's been studying comparative biology between humans and other species. But look at what she's focusing on. The document detailed human stress responses, adaptation mechanisms, and something called aggressive survival instincts. Dr. Foster had been analyzing Jake's medical data without his knowledge, building a profile of human capabilities that could be used to argue against human integration. This is wrong, Jake said. They're treating me like a lab rat instead of a student. It gets worse, Lisa said. I found communication logs showing that your test results and behavior reports are being sent to officials across the galaxy. You're not just being watched here at the Academy. You're being studied by the entire Galactic Council. Jake sat back in his chair trying to process this information. Every day he had spent at the Academy, every class he had attended, every interaction with other students had been recorded and analyzed. His privacy had been completely violated. all in the name of determining whether humans were suitable for galactic civilization. "We need to talk to Professor HFY," Jake said. "If we can't trust anyone else, maybe we can trust him." They found the Centaurian professor in his office, reviewing student assignments. When Jake and Lisa explained what they had discovered, his large eyes grew even wider with concern. "This is very troubling," Professor HFY said, his translator giving his voice a worried tone. "I knew there were some officials who opposed the human exchange program, but I did not realize the surveillance had become so extensive. Do you know who's behind it?" Lisa asked. Professor HFY was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "There is a faction within the Galactic Council called the Purists. They believe that species from dangerous worlds should be kept separate from the rest of galactic society. They fear that contact with Deathworld species will lead to violence and chaos." "But that's ridiculous," Jake protested. "I've never hurt anyone here. I've tried to help other students whenever I could." "I know," the professor said gently, "and many of us see your positive contributions. But the purists focus on your capabilities rather than your character. They see how easily you adapted to the gravity emergency yesterday, and they interpret that as evidence of dangerous potential." Jake felt frustrated and angry. His natural abilities, the same traits that had helped him save his classmates, were being used as evidence against his entire species. It seemed like no matter what he did, some people would always see humans as a threat. "What can we do?" Lisa asked. Professor HFY stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the stars beyond the academy. "The truth is, Jake, you are being tested every day. Not just in your classes, but in how you handle difficult situations. The purists are hoping you will fail, that you will do something that proves their point about human aggression. So I have to be perfect," Jake said. "One mistake and I prove their case." "Not perfect," the professor corrected. "But you must continue to show that human strength can be used for protection rather than destruction. That human adaptability serves peace rather than war." As they left the professor's office, Jake felt the weight of his responsibility more than ever. He wasn't just a student trying to pass his classes. He was representing the entire human race, and there were powerful forces working against him. "What's our next move?" Lisa asked as they walked through the corridors. "We keep gathering evidence," Jake said, "and we watch our backs. If the purists are willing to spy on me and sabotage training exercises, they might try something more direct." "You think they'll escalate?" Jake thought about the surveillance device, the mysterious equipment failure, and the way some students had looked at him with suspicion and fear. "I think they're just getting started, and I think we need to be ready for whatever comes next." That evening, as Jake returned to his quarters, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were new surveillance devices hidden in different locations around his room. The Watchers had discovered that he found their first spy device, and instead of backing down, they had increased their surveillance. Jake Morrison, the pupil from a Deathworld, was beginning to understand that his education at Galactic Academy would test much more than his academic abilities. It would test whether humanity deserved a place among the stars. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the Academy's main auditorium, surrounded by hundreds of alien students and faculty members. Today was the day he had been dreading for weeks. The trials of worthiness had begun, and every species in the galaxy would be watching to see if the human from Earth could prove his people deserved a place in galactic civilization. Chancellor Morden stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over Jake. The reptilian alien's scales shimmered under the bright lights as he spoke into the recording devices that would broadcast this event across the galaxy. "Today we witness an ancient tradition," the Chancellor announced. "The trials of worthiness determine whether a species possesses the qualities necessary for membership in our peaceful galactic community. The human candidate will face 3 challenges designed to test the core values we hold dear." Jake tried to stay calm, but his heart was racing. Over the past week, he had learned that these trials were not the standard tests given to other species. They had been specifically modified to challenge human limitations. The purists wanted him to fail, and they had designed these trials to make failure almost certain. In the audience, Jake spotted Lisa Carter sitting with Professor HFY. The Centaurian professor had tried to prepare Jake for what was coming, but there were limits to how much he could reveal without violating Academy rules. Lisa gave Jake a small nod of encouragement, but her worried expression told him everything he needed to know about how dangerous these trials would be. The first trial tests mental resilience under psychic pressure, Chancellor Morden continued. The candidate must maintain focus while exposed to mental techniques developed by our most advanced telepathic species. Jake was led to a special chamber where 3 alien beings waited for him. Their species was known throughout the galaxy for their powerful mental abilities. They could read thoughts, project emotions, and overwhelm weaker minds with ease. Most species found their mental pressure difficult to handle for more than a few minutes. The chamber door sealed behind Jake, leaving him alone with the telepaths. Immediately he felt something pressing against his mind. It was like having someone shouting inside his head while also trying to make him feel afraid, angry, and confused all at once. Jake closed his eyes and drew on techniques he had learned back on Earth. During his senior year of high school, he had dealt with severe test anxiety and social pressure. His school counselor had taught him meditation and breathing exercises to handle stress. He had also learned mental toughness from years of competitive sports, where staying focused under pressure meant the difference between winning and losing. The telepathic assault grew stronger. Jake felt waves of fear trying to make him panic, followed by anger that tried to make him lash out. But instead of fighting these feelings, he acknowledged them and let them pass through his mind like clouds moving across the sky. This was just another kind of storm, and Jake had weathered many storms on Earth. His human brain, shaped by millions of years of evolution on a dangerous planet, had developed strong defenses against psychological pressure. Humans had to stay calm during natural disasters, predator attacks, and social conflicts to survive. The mental techniques that worked on other species had less effect on a mind trained by Earth's constant challenges. After 30 minutes, the telepaths stopped their assault. One of them, a being with large purple eyes, looked surprised as she examined Jake. "Remarkable," she said to Chancellor Morden through the chamber's communication system. "The human mind has natural barriers we did not expect." He maintained focus throughout the entire test. Jake felt relieved, but he knew this was only the first trial. The hardest challenges were still ahead. The second trial took place in the Academy's environmental simulation chamber. As Jake entered the massive space, he saw that it had been transformed into a nightmare landscape, combining the worst elements from multiple Deathworlds across the galaxy. The floor was covered with acidic pools that could dissolve most materials. Poisonous plants with thorns the size of daggers grew everywhere. The air was filled with toxic spores, and the temperature shifted from freezing cold to burning hot every few minutes. Electrical storms crackled overhead while the gravity changed, unpredictably. "The candidate must cross this environment and reach the beacon on the far side," Chancellor Morden announced. "This test will demonstrate whether Deathworld adaptations lead to destruction or preservation." Jake understood what was really happening. The purists expected him to fight his way through this environment, using violence and aggression to overcome the obstacles. They wanted him to destroy the plants, force his way through the hazards, and prove that humans were naturally destructive. But Jake had a different approach. He studied the environment carefully, looking for patterns and connections. On Earth, he had learned that nature was not something to conquer, but something to understand and work with. His grandfather had been a forest ranger who taught Jake that the key to surviving in the wilderness was observation and adaptation, not force. Jake noticed that the poisonous plants grew in specific patterns, leaving safe pathways between them. The acidic pools had solid edges that could be used for crossing. The electrical storms followed predictable cycles, and the gravity changes had a rhythm he could learn to anticipate. Instead of destroying the environment, Jake moved through it like he was part of it. He waited for the right moments, chose the safest paths, and even helped some of the simulated creatures avoid the hazards. When he encountered a section that seemed impossible to cross safely, he used his knowledge of physics and engineering to build simple tools from materials he found in the environment. The watching aliens were amazed. They had expected the human to charge through the obstacles with brute force. Instead, Jake treated the deadly environment like a complex puzzle to be solved rather than an enemy to be defeated. It took him 2 hours to cross the simulation chamber, but when Jake reached the beacon on the far side, he had done so without harming a single plant or creature. He had proved that human adaptability could be used for cooperation instead of conquest. But as Jake caught his breath after completing the second trial, Chancellor Morden stepped forward with an expression that was hard to read. "The final trial begins immediately," the Chancellor announced. "This test will determine not just your personal worthiness, but the future of human participation in galactic society." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had hoped for time to rest and prepare, but it seemed the trials were designed to push him to his absolute limits. As he was led toward the third testing area, he could hear the murmur of voices from the watching crowd. Some sounded impressed by his performance so far, but others seemed disappointed that he had not failed as expected. Lisa Carter caught his eye from the audience and mouthed the words, "Stay strong." Professor Zephahai nodded encouragingly, but Jake could see worry in the alien's large eyes. The third trial chamber was different from the others. Instead of physical obstacles or mental challenges, it contained a complex holographic display showing what appeared to be a diplomatic crisis between multiple alien species. Ships were positioned for battle, communications were breaking down, and it looked like war was about to break out. "Your final test is to resolve this conflict," Chancellor Morden said. "You have 1 hour to prevent a war between 5 different species. The methods you choose will determine whether humanity is seen as a force for peace or a threat to galactic stability." Jake realized this was the real test. The purists were not just evaluating his individual abilities. They were trying to see if humans would choose violence when faced with an impossible situation. They expected him to recommend military solutions, proving that Deathworld species were inherently warlike. But Jake had learned something important during his time at the Kyo Academy. He had learned that being strong did not mean being aggressive, and that surviving on a dangerous world had taught humans skills that could be used for building rather than destroying. As the holographic crisis played out around him, Jake took a deep breath and began to work. He had 1 hour to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars, and he intended to use every second of it. Jake Morrison stared at the holographic display showing 5 different alien fleets ready for battle. Each species had legitimate complaints against the others. The Centaurians claimed their trade routes were being blocked. The Krixtal insisted their mining rights were being violated. The Verdani said their sacred groves were being destroyed. The Hegemony demanded tribute payments that others could not afford. The peaceful Aquari were caught in the middle, afraid their water worlds would become battlefields. In a normal diplomatic situation, each species would send representatives to negotiate for months or years until they reached some kind of agreement. But Jake had 1 hour to prevent a war, and everyone expected him to fail. The purists wanted him to recommend military action, proving that humans were too aggressive for galactic society. Jake took a deep breath and thought about everything he had learned on Earth. His high school had been diverse with students from many different backgrounds and cultures. He had seen conflicts between groups who seemed to hate each other, but he had also seen how those same groups could work together when they found common ground. The key was not to choose sides, but to help everyone understand what they really needed instead of what they thought they wanted. Jake activated the communication system and requested individual meetings with each species representative. The holographic figures appeared before him one by one, each suspicious and angry about the crisis. First, he spoke with the Centaurian admiral, whose fleets were blocking trade routes. "Admiral, your people are known throughout the galaxy for their intelligence and fairness. Can you help me understand what your species truly needs from this situation?" The Centaurian admiral looked surprised by Jake's respectful tone. Most younger species tried to lecture them or demand immediate action. "We need secure passage for our merchant ships. The Krixtal have been raiding our cargo vessels, but they claim we are stealing from their mining operations." "What would make your ships feel secure?" Jake asked. "Clear shipping lanes and agreements about which zones belong to whom," the admiral replied. Jake nodded and moved to the next representative. The Krixtal commander was angry and defensive, her insect-like features clicking with agitation. "Commander, the Crixtal are known as excellent engineers and builders. What does your species need to feel that this situation is fair?" The commander's mandibles stopped clicking for a moment. She seemed surprised that Jake acknowledged her people's skills, instead of focusing on the accusations against them. "We need protected mining zones. Our colonies depend on the minerals we extract, but other species keep expanding into our territory without permission." "What would protected mining zones look like to you?" Jake asked. "Clearly marked boundaries that everyone respects, and compensation when our operations are disrupted," she replied. Jake continued this pattern with each representative. Instead of arguing about who was right or wrong, he focused on understanding what each species actually needed to feel safe and respected. The Verdani wanted their spiritual sites protected from industrial damage. The hegemony needed economic agreements that would not bankrupt smaller species. The Aquari wanted guarantees that their worlds would remain neutral in any conflicts. As Jake listened to each group, he began to see connections that the feuding species had missed. Their needs were not actually contradictory. They were just expressed in ways that sounded like demands and threats instead of reasonable requests. Jake called all 5 representatives together for a joint meeting. This was the moment the purists expected him to choose sides or recommend military action. "I have spoken with each of your peoples individually," Jake began, "and I have learned something important. None of you actually want war. You all want security, respect, and the ability to take care of your people. The problem is not that your needs conflict. The problem is that you have been trying to solve this crisis by making demands instead of making agreements." The representatives looked skeptical, but Jake continued. "Admiral, your people need secure trade routes. Commander, your people need protected mining zones. What if we created a joint security force that protects both trade ships and mining operations? Each species contributes ships and personnel, so everyone has a stake in keeping the peace." The Centaurian Admiral and Crixtal Commander looked at each other with surprise. They had been thinking of each other as enemies, but Jake was suggesting they could be partners in solving the same problem. "Ambassador," Jake said to the Verdani representative, "your people want their sacred sites protected. What if the joint security force included protecting all cultural and spiritual locations? That way every species knows their important places are safe." The plant-like being rustled her leaves thoughtfully. "This could work, but who would lead such a force?" "That's where the Aquari come in," Jake said, turning to their representative. "Your people are known for being neutral and peaceful. If the Aquari provided leadership for the joint security force, everyone could trust that decisions would be fair rather than biased." The Aquari representative looked pleased but concerned. "We would be honored to serve, but our people lack military experience." "Which is exactly why you are perfect for the job," Jake replied. "You would focus on preventing conflicts instead of winning them, and the hegemony could provide the administrative structure to make sure everyone contributes fairly and shares the costs." Jake spent the next 30 minutes working out the details with all 5 representatives. Instead of fighting over territory, they would create shared security zones. Instead of competing for resources, they would establish fair trading agreements. Instead of making demands, they would make commitments to each other. The solution was not perfect, but it was something all 5 species could accept. More importantly, it was something they had created together instead of having forced on them by outside powers. When the hour was up, Jake stood before Chancellor Morden and the assembled crowd. The holographic crisis had been resolved without a single shot being fired. No one had been forced to surrender or admit defeat. All 5 species had found a way to get what they needed while giving others what they needed too. "The human candidate has prevented the war," Chancellor Morden announced, but his tone was difficult to read. "However, the methods used must be evaluated to determine their suitability for galactic civilization." Jake felt his heart sink. Even though he had succeeded in stopping the conflict, the purists might still argue that his approach was somehow wrong or dangerous. But then something unexpected happened. Crixtal, the insectoid student who had been hostile to Jake since his arrival, stood up in the audience. "I wish to speak," Crixtal announced, her translator giving her voice a formal tone. Chancellor Morden looked surprised but nodded permission. I have watched the human student since he arrived at our academy, Crixtel said. At first I believed the rumors that Deathworld species were dangerous and aggressive, but I have seen Jake Morrison risk his life to save Centaurian students during the gravity emergency. I have seen him treat all species with respect, even when they did not respect him. And now I have seen him solve a crisis that our greatest diplomats could not resolve. Other students began standing up around the auditorium. A Centaurian spoke about how Jake had helped her with difficult coursework. A Verdani mentioned how Jake had protected smaller students from bullies. More and more voices joined in, creating a chorus of support that the purists had not expected. Professor HFY also stood up. I have been documenting the human student's behavior since his arrival, he announced. I have evidence that the recent accidents and equipment failures were not accidental. Someone has been trying to sabotage the human exchange program. The auditorium erupted in surprised chatter. Chancellor Morden called for order, but it was clear that the carefully planned trials had not gone according to the purists' expectations. Jake looked out at the crowd of alien students and faculty, many of whom were now defending him and his species. For the first time since arriving at Galactic Academy, he felt like he truly belonged. The trials were over, but the real test of humanity's place in galactic society was just beginning. 3 days after the trials of worthiness, Jake Morrison sat in Chancellor Morden's office waiting for the final decision about his future at Galactic Academy. The walls were covered with certificates and awards from hundreds of different species, representing thousands of years of peaceful cooperation between alien civilizations. Jake wondered if humans would ever earn a place among those honored species. The door opened and several important figures entered the room. Chancellor Morden came first, followed by Ambassador Velthera from the Hegemony, Professor HFY, and Dr. Amy Foster. Jake was surprised to see Dr. Foster there, since he had learned she was studying his medical data without permission. Jake Morrison, Chancellor Morden began, his reptilian features serious. The Galactic Council has reviewed your performance during the trials of worthiness. We have also investigated the accusations of sabotage and conspiracy against the human exchange program. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had passed the trials, but political decisions were often more complicated than simple pass or fail grades. Ambassador Velthera stepped forward. Her tall, elegant form moved gracefully as she spoke. I must begin with an apology. I was one of the voices questioning whether humans should be allowed into galactic society. I believed that species from dangerous worlds would bring violence and chaos to our peaceful communities. Jake nodded politely, though he felt frustrated by the assumption that Earth's challenges automatically made humans aggressive. However, the ambassador continued, your performance during the trials has changed my perspective entirely. You faced mental pressure that breaks most beings. You navigated deadly environments without causing destruction, and you solved a diplomatic crisis that our best negotiators could not resolve. Most importantly, you did all of this while showing respect and compassion for every species involved. Dr. Amy Foster stepped forward next, looking uncomfortable. Jake, I owe you an apology as well. I was studying your biological responses and capabilities, but I was doing so with the assumption that human traits were inherently dangerous. I was looking for evidence to support fears rather than trying to understand the positive potential of human adaptations. What did your research actually show? Jake asked. That everything we feared about Deathworld species was based on misunderstanding, Dr. Foster replied. Your stress responses are not signs of aggression. They are signs of remarkable adaptability. Your physical capabilities are not designed for violence. They are designed for survival and protection. Your mental resilience is not coldness. It is the ability to stay calm and helpful when others are panicking. Professor HFY spoke up next. My investigation revealed that the equipment failures and surveillance were organized by a small group within the Academy administration. They believed they were protecting galactic civilization from a dangerous influence, but they were actually preventing us from learning valuable lessons from human students. Chancellor Morden nodded gravely. Those responsible have been removed from their positions. The surveillance of human students has been completely stopped, and new protocols have been established to ensure fair treatment for all exchange students. Jake felt relief washing over him, but he was still waiting for the most important news. What does this mean for the human exchange program? It means, Chancellor Morden said with what might have been a smile on his reptilian features, that you have not only secured your own place at Galactic Academy, but you have opened the door for many more human students to follow. The Chancellor moved to his desk and picked up an official document covered with seals and signatures. The Galactic Council has voted to expand the human exchange program. Earth will be invited to send 50 students next year, and a permanent human liaison office will be established at the Academy. Jake felt overwhelmed by the news. When he had first arrived at the Academy, he had just been hoping to pass his classes and avoid causing any major problems. Now he had apparently changed the relationship between Earth and the entire galaxy. There is more, Ambassador Velthara added. Your approach to the diplomatic crisis has impressed many council members. We would like to invite Earth to participate in a new interspecies cooperation initiative. Human perspectives on conflict resolution and adaptation could be valuable in many situations across the galaxy. Dr. Amy Foster nodded enthusiastically. And your biological research is opening up entirely new fields of study. We want to learn how different planetary environments create different strengths that can benefit everyone. Instead of fearing these differences, we want to celebrate and utilize them. Professor Zeph High approached Jake with a small device in his hands. This is for you, he said, offering what looked like a modified communicator. It will allow you to stay in contact with Earth and help coordinate the expanded exchange program. You are no longer just a student here. You are humanity's first official representative to Galactic Academy. Jake took the device, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity it represented. What happens now? Now you continue your education, Chancellor Morden replied. But you will also help prepare for the arrival of more human students. You will work with our diplomatic corps to develop new cooperation agreements. And you will help us understand how the diversity of planetary origins can make our galactic community stronger rather than more dangerous. As the meeting ended and the officials left his office, Jake found himself alone with his thoughts. He walked to the large window that looked out at the stars beyond the Academy. Somewhere among those points of light was Earth, the blue and green world that had shaped him into who he was. A few months ago, Jake had been nervous about representing humanity at an alien academy. He had worried about fitting in, passing his classes, and not embarrassing his entire species. Now he understood that his real job had never been to hide his human nature or apologize for coming from a challenging world. His job was to show that human traits developed on Earth could be gifts to galactic civilization. Adaptability was not aggression. Strength was not violence. Resilience was not coldness. The same qualities that helped humans survive on a dangerous planet could help all species solve problems and build better communities together. Jake activated his new communicator and sent a message to Earth. Mission accomplished, he wrote. Humanity has earned its place among the stars, and this is just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Jake watched as Galactic Academy transformed. New courses were added to study different planetary adaptations. Exchange programs were established with other Deathworld species who had previously been excluded. The Academy's motto was changed from unity through similarity to strength through diversity. Crystal approached Jake one day in the dining hall, her insectoid features showing what he had learned to recognize as friendship. I have been thinking about what you said during the trials, she told him, about working together instead of competing. My people would like to propose a joint research project with human students when they arrive. What kind of project? Jake asked. Combining human adaptability with Crystal engineering skills. We think we could solve problems that neither species could handle alone. Jake smiled. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen. Instead of seeing differences as threats, the species at Galactic Academy were beginning to see them as opportunities. As Jake looked around the dining hall, he saw alien students from dozens of different worlds eating together, studying together, and planning projects together. Some of them came from peaceful garden worlds, others from harsh desert planets, and still others from frozen ice moons. Each species brought different strengths shaped by their home environments. Jake Morrison, the first pupil from a Deathworld, had learned that diversity was not something to fear or overcome. It was something to celebrate and share. And now, with more humans coming to join him, the real adventure of building a truly inclusive galactic civilization could begin. Earth's children were ready to take their place among the stars, not as conquerors or threats, but as partners in the greatest collaboration the galaxy had ever seen.